Hello, my name is John Kettler, and today I will be auditioning for the role of 2014 commentator for the National Championship and World Championship tournaments in the Pokemon trading card game. Today's footage is brought to you by a channel that I like to go to quite often, The Future Online 619. They have some fun footage from games, pre-releases, collecting, so go ahead and check it out. That's THA Future Online 619. So, to the left we have an Emboar deck, and to the right we have an Yveltal EX deck. Two very popular archetypes in the current format, so let's just see how this game goes. The player on the right, that is the Yveltal EX player, won the coin toss, so we have a convincing start for him right off the bat. We have draw cards for him, we have disruptions, item cards. There really isn't that much more to ask for, in addition to the central focus of his deck, Yveltal EX, with two very powerful attacks, Evil Ball, 20 damage plus 20 more for the total number of energy attached to both psychic Pokemon, and Y Cyclone for a clean 90. Now, we noticed the player to the left accidentally drew her card for the first turn. Minor accident occasionally happens, but at any rate, the player to the right will be going first, so he draws his card, and as we said, he has a lot of options right off the bat. A good draw card in the form of Shauna, shuffling his hand back into his deck to draw 5 cards, and red card. Now, red card is a very useful disruption item card, forcing the opponent to the left to shuffle her hand back into her deck and draw 4 cards. This is extremely useful against an aggressive deck like Emboar that requires lots of setup, because in order to get everything she needs to make the strategy work, she needs a Tepig, she needs a way to evolve that Tepig into Emboar eventually, and most importantly, she needs the energy to Inferno Fandango. That is, she needs energy to attach through the ability, not just regular attachments for a turn. So, both players are shuffling their hands back in due to the red card and the Shauna. We'll be getting 5 cards out of the player to the right and 4 out of the player to the left. That's a net decrease for the player to the left. She had 6 in her hand, going down to 4. Really low odds of hitting what she needs to make her first turn really productive, whereas the player on the right has already put himself in a commanding position. He just needs to hit an energy card, as well as something else to keep him alive this turn. And so we already see a continually strong hand for the player on the right, a double colorless energy worth 2 colorless energy upon attachment, Hypnotoxic Laser, and a Bicycle. This will allow him to play his hand down and draw into some pretty good stuff. Now, the player to the left, she was really kind enough to fan her hand to us. She doesn't really have that much good. The best thing she has is a Colress supporter, where she shuffles her hand back in and draws cards up to the number of benched Pokemon in play. Unfortunately, there really aren't that many benched Pokemon in play at the moment. So, meanwhile, the player to the right is continuing his commanding position, attaching that double colorless, and attaching a Dark Claw. Now, Dark Claw is an interesting choice in this deck because it adds plus 20 damage to dark attacks, but it seems counterproductive to the Bouffalant because for Bouffalant, it's a colorless Pokemon, therefore you'd want something that adds 20 damage for it too, like Muscle Band from the X and Y expansion. It's effectively a reprint of Dark Claw, but it works for anything, so it makes it the superior choice. Now, we see another disruption card from the player on the right, a Hypnotoxic Laser, automatic poison to the defending Pokemon, as well as Sleep Upon Heads. We didn't see that sleep, but we already saw the poison, so it's been a all things considered great turn for the player on the right. He doesn't get an attack off, but he'll pass knowing that he's in a pretty commanding spot right now. So anyways, player to the left, she had a Bouffalant in her hand, benched it down, and she was able to draw a Professor Juniper. That's pretty surprising here. She was able to get out of her bad spot, switch into that Bouffalant before she discards the switch for her Juniper, getting rid of that poison, and drawing a brand new hand of 7. So what looked like a bad spot for her, and in all intents and purposes should have been a bad spot, has now become a much more convincing start. So now she's contemplating what to do. The player on the right fanned his hand out for our benefit, showing that he has supporter cards, as well as options for later on down the line. And out of her player on the left, we're seeing a Tepig. Tepig, that essential card we were talking about earlier to set up her Emboar. And in addition to that, she'll be playing a level ball to search her deck for a second Tepig. Now, the wisdom in that play is by benching down 2 Tepigs, she's able to protect herself from a possible Pokemon Catcher. Pokemon Catcher, an item card where if you flip heads, you bring up one of the benched Pokemon and can attack it and knock it out quite easily. But with 2 Tepigs in play, she has the option to rare candy into her Emboar next turn without having to search out another Tepig and wait a turn. So let's see what's coming out of this. We aren't seeing the level ball. If we did see the level ball, it was just to thin out her deck. That is extremely interesting. So now she's in a very vulnerable spot. Either her prizes are bad, that is, she may have some Tepigs in those 6 prizes, or she simply does not run that many Tepigs, which would be pretty surprising to me, but at any rate, that's her situation right now. Now, we're seeing an Ultra Ball on the player on the right's front for a Voltorb from X and Y. Very interesting choice, not too common in these Yveltal EX decks. Voltorb evolves you into Electrode from Plasma Freeze, where you use its ability, Magnetic Draw, to draw cards until you have 4 in your hand. So, it seems to me that what the player on the right is doing is he runs a very thin line of the Electrode that is a tech line, a 1-1 line, one of the basic and one of the stage 1, so that he has the consistency throughout the game, but not at the expense of space in his deck. So we got that Voltorb on the second turn, and a Juniper to draw more cards. Hopefully, for his sake, he'll hit that Darkness Energy, and if he does, then he very well could be knocking out that Bouffalant. No, I'm sorry, I'm mistaken. He would be just a little bit short. If he uses Evil Ball, he would be doing exactly 100. Sorry again. So we've got 3 energy on the Yveltal EX. We've got 1 fire on the Bouffalant. If he uses Evil Ball, that'll be 80 between the 4 energy, 20 for Dark Claw, 20 for the base, and reduce 20 for Buffer, a very useful ability, reducing 20 damage from all attacks dealt to the Bouffalant. So, right off the bat, we've already got a knockout coming, one way or the other. If he had a Pokemon Catcher in his hand, he could bring up that Tepig and get into a commanding position, but it appears we won't be seeing that. We'll be seeing another Ultra Ball for what we don't know yet. We saw a lightning Pokemon in his hand, so that either could disprove our idea about there being a Tech 1-1 line, or alternatively, he could be running something else entirely. But instead we have a Darkrai EX, very popular card from Dark Explorers, from the Tins, that for its ability uses Dark Cloak, making it so that any Pokemon with a Darkness Energy attached to it has free retreat. So he's going to bench that down, making it so that in case he needs to evacuate that Yveltal EX, he can. But anyways, we'll see what else is coming out of the player on the right. We have a bench Darkrai EX. A little bit of thinking about what he wants to do next. And this has to just be a really scary situation for the player on the left. She doesn't have a whole lot of cards in her hand. She doesn't even have an Emboar out, and right off the bat, we're going to be seeing a quick knockout. And there is a Bicycle for 2. Bring his hand up from 2 to 4. Highly aggressive deck, constantly drawing, and once that Electrode gets out on the board next turn, then it will be even more aggressive. And now he's contemplating whether or not attacking in this precise way will be all that he needs to do. He's probably calculating the math, and as we discussed earlier, it's exactly 100. And I apologize, we have a special guest star in the background, my cat Boots. She also wants to audition for the role of commentator for 2014 Worlds and Nationals. So I guess this is technically a co-commentary for those keeping score at home. And it seems they're still stuck on the math here. Double checking it just to be sure. And this is a very useful thing to do. Occasionally it slows down the game, but nevertheless it's very important to make sure that all of your math in all instances is right. It's a very silly misplay to make if you get something wrong by even just a little bit, because you could effectively waste tons of resources as well as an entire turn. And in many instances of games I've seen in the past, it leads to ultimately losing the game if you announce the wrong attack at the wrong time. But he was able to check what we were able to check earlier and make sure that his math was correct, do his evil ball for exactly 100 and draw his prize. We see from the fan out that he has a still strong hand. Meanwhile, the player on the left, she has lightning energy attached for the turn, and a Sky Arrow Bridge. Sky Arrow Bridge, reducing the retreat cost of all basic Pokemon by 1 colorless. And fortunately for her, she has an N card, so all those resources the player on the right has been using could come back to bite him in the butt, because he has a lot of draw cards in his discard pile. He has Bicycles, he has the Shauna from earlier, and he has Ultra Balls meant to fish out that Electrode, all in that discard pile, making the odds of hitting something really good less likely. But we've also seen several draw cards played by the player on the left as well. However, luck is on the side of the player on the right. He was able to hit plenty of energy cards, as well as a Professor Juniper and a Verbank City Gym to replace that Sky Arrow Bridge. Verbank City Gym, once it's out in play, triples poison. Fantastic synergy with Hypnotoxic Laser. So both players are considering what to do. We see some moving around, shuffling around. Oh, and it looks like the Emboar player has passed for the turn. She didn't hit Rare Candy for her Emboar, and she didn't even hit a Pignite, so right now she is just up a creek without a paddle. So we've got another double colorless energy out of the player on the right. He's getting really aggressive right now. He's not afraid of any funny text like Mewtwo EX, which is essentially Evil Ball, but times as opposed to 20 plus. No expected responses of any kind. He's getting very aggressive, maybe a little greedy, but for all intents and purposes, that's worth it at this point. He's already well ahead, and he hits a Dark Patch off of this upcoming Juniper, then he could take extreme command of the game, attaching energy to his bench Pokemon. Dark Patch, an item card, lets you attach Darkness energy from your discard to one of your Darkness Pokemon. And there's that Professor Juniper. So 3 Darkness hit the discard, and if he hits, well, 2 Dark Patch in this situation, he could be in a fantastic spot. There's that Electrode back. Again, we were talking about low odds of hitting it, but low odds no more. He has that Electrode. He's now relatively immune to disruption supporter cards like N, and he will be able to flow into his resources without much trouble at all. And he's contemplating what to do, because other than that Electrode and the Ultra Ball, he doesn't have a whole lot that's good right now. He has another red card, so if the Emboar player's hand gets strong later on down the line, he can just use that red card, force her into a compromising situation again. But for now, he will just be holding off. His Ultra Ball, he doesn't have really too many good things to be getting at this point, but Save Life from Dark Explorers is always a good option. 70 HP, and the ever ubiquitous Junk Hunt attack, where you get to bring it up for 1 Darkness energy and search your discard for 2 item cards to put into your hand. That will allow him to get back red cards. It will allow him to get back Dark Patches, and it will allow him to get back Bicycles, therefore giving him useful support in the late game in case it comes down to a close match between Emboar attackers and his Yveltals. But at the moment, that's not the case. He's just in a commanding position and is going to score another knockout thanks to Evil Ball. And he's adding up the damage again, double checking whether or not he has enough. It's significantly more obvious at this point that he does, so he just goes for the Evil Ball and knocks it out. And meanwhile, we have our very brave, hopefully fortuitous Emboar player trying to get something going here. So luckily for her, she has an Ultra Ball. She can continue this game at least one more turn. And we have our Voltol player fanning out his hand. Still strong resources. Oh, and we have an Ultra Ball for a Rayquaza EX. Rayquaza EX, 170 HP, and its second attack is by far the biggest reason to play it. Dragon Burst for any number of energy, you deal 60 damage times the number, whatever type you discard. Its base requirements are a fire and a lightning, but if you have more fire or more lightning, you can choose to discard one or the other. And if you discard all of your lightning energy, you deal 60 times the number of lightning discarded. If you discard your fire energy, discard 60 times the number of fire. And since this is an M-War deck, you can bet which one is the bigger focus and which one will be used more often. So we have another N out of our M-War player. And at this point, she is just begging to hit something reasonably useful. Rare candy for an Emboar and some fire energy. Maybe even just a Tepig, who knows? All she knows is that she has to hit something sooner, or else this game's going to be over. And this happens a lot with these matchups where you have a setup deck, very powerful deck like Emboar, that needs to hit things, it just doesn't hit them at all. You see at the very least from the player on the left's hand a computer search. Do we see anything else though? So what's she going to search? What is she going to get? Does she have in those other three cards something to set up that Emboar? Looks like she does not, unfortunately for her. So she's just searching for something to get this game going. There's another Tepig, and so she's forced into a conservative play in this spot, having to get another Tepig, avoid the terrible scenario where she just doesn't have any Tepig at all, any way to get Emboar out, and just gets steamrolled in the game. So she's just sacrificing another Tepig, hoping to set up. And this is another unfortunate thing that happens quite often in these games too. Aside from just getting blown out without ever getting an Emboar out, you could get the Emboar out too late. So even if you are Inferno Fandangoing and using Rayquaza EX to score knockouts on anything, you just are too far behind at that point. So from our Yveltal EX player, we notice a surprisingly conservative move at this point. He has chosen to bring up a Sableye, and we can bet that he's going to be junk hunting at this point, but I do not get that play at all. I'm surprised that he's doing that as opposed to continuing his aggressive plays and setting up more and more KOs later on. So not only has he sacrificed the opportunity to draw a prize this turn, but it will take him a whole additional turn just to get out of this game. Maybe he was assuming a really powerful hand from his opponent the next turn. Who knows? Maybe he's trying to bait her into bringing up that Rayquaza to attack. We'll just have to see. Nope. Instead, we're just going to get more attachments to that Yveltal EX. Is he going to do something a little sneakier, like loading up energy on his Yveltals just to switch out? Nope. No, that's not the case. So it looks like he's just going to go for a junk hunt. And this may give the player on the left her opening that she needed to set up Emboar and take this game. But then again, that may be easier said than done because the player on the right is getting the resources that he needs, the ever common resources that are the cornerstone of his deck. Dark Patch and Hypnotoxic Laser. Dark Patch for more acceleration, Hypnotoxic Laser for more disruption, and setting up that Rayquaza EX for a much easier knockout later on. So anyways, it's the Emboar player's turn. She's attached her fire energy for the turn, her attachment for the turn. But if she has a way to get Emboar out, then she can start Inferno Fandangoing. Super Rod for a lightning, a fire, and a Bouffalant. Getting those resources back, especially that Bouffalant, can be very useful against the Yveltal later on. And we have a Juniper. We see a rare candy. Oh no! And it looks like she may have missed the Emboar again. So it appears that the player on the left runs Pokemon Catcher as well. And instead, she's just stuck with a lot of basics and a whole lot of nothing when it comes to attacking. So we got that Hypnotoxic Laser going. I'm surprised he's playing it right now as opposed to holding off for when a Rayquaza or a Reshiram come out and be active. But on the other hand, he may just be playing this really conservatively. These two know each other pretty well, so therefore he may know her list reasonably well. So at this point, he feels comfortable going conservatively with that Sableye. Could we see another Junk Hunt out of him, though? That is the question. Or are we just going to get another Evil Ball? Rather, we're just going to get a little bit of a quick pause, figuring out what to do. He opts to play with Shauna. Now he can be a little more aggressive with when he uses his supporter cards because he knows that no matter how low his hand gets and no matter how dangerous an end can be for him in most other circumstances, he'll just be able to magnetic draw out of it. Meanwhile, I bet this is pretty frustrating for the Emboar player. Now, one very common card used in the top tier lists of Emboar is Tropical Beach, a stadium card that ends your turn, but at the expense of ending your turn, lets you draw until you have 7 cards in your hand. It is very useful for the consistency of the deck. Gives Skyla, lets you a powerful supporter card that lets you search your deck for supporters, trainers, or a stadium. But unfortunately for her, it appears she doesn't play any and doesn't have nearly as much to do in her opening turns. Meanwhile, we have a Dark Patch from the Yveltal player. Things are getting extremely powerful for him. The advantage is looking like it just can't be overcome at this point. That is one deck that definitely does not need Tropical Beach. We've seen it occasionally used in Yveltal decks, but to this deck's best benefit, he is just better off with those disruption cards, like that red card and that Hypnotoxic Laser, because those are going to keep him ahead. He's contemplating what to do, whether or not to get more resources back. Oh, and it looks like he got some resources back. So he's just going for that Junk Hunt again, or is he going to go ahead and start attacking? Nope. Nope, he just Junk Hunts again. I am perplexed. I am perplexed because at this point he would be up by an additional 2 prizes. But at any rate, our player to the left has that rare candy in Emboar. She drew the Emboar off the top of her deck, and now she is back in the game. But unfortunately for her, she doesn't have any way to retreat that Tepig, so she's just content with having to pass. Now, the player on the right has a lot of fun options this turn. He can continue to Junk Hunt. He can bring up one of his Yveltal EXs, which would be overkill against a Tepig with only 10 HP left, or he could bring up his Bouffalant. Now, in this option, going with the Bouffalant may be an interesting play because it requires the player on the left to discard way too many resources, either with a Reshiram or a Rayquaza. But on the other hand, he could just go ahead and Junk Hunt and get more useful cards back. So at this point, he may be figuring that, well, why not? He's already been conservative enough this game. Why not Junk Hunt again and get more useful resources back? So he's searching his discard, and it appears that's exactly what he's doing. He's getting back cards that look like they're exclusively useful just for loading up Yveltals and dealing bigger and bigger damage with those evil balls later on down the line. He knows he wants that energy switch, and he's probably contemplating the Dark Patch too. And he's calculating his math here, figuring out what would help him the most if he gets end down to 3 prizes. And he gets that back. Oh, he gets back a double colorless energy. Again, it's going to be really useful, not just for setting up that Bouffalante for Gold Breaker, 60 damage plus 60 when dealing damage to an EX Pokemon, but also useful for Evil Ball as well. So we see a Pokemon catcher, and that Pokemon catcher is Tails. So that Yveltal EX with all that energy on it is not going to die. Meanwhile, the player on the left, she's thinking about what to do, shuffling her hand around. You'll see that as a pretty common nervous tick of players to shuffle their hands back, flipping the cards. But one way to alleviate that is do what she did and just put her hand down on the table. Now, it's possible she just doesn't really have that many resources left, and as we were talking about earlier, it may be too late. But we see retreat into Reshiram. But it looks like she ended up just passing? Yeah. Looks like she just passed. Probably wanting to bait one of those Yveltal EXs out into the active position. But if that happens, it's not going to be to the detriment of the player on the right, because he'll be able to conserve his resources thanks to all that junk hunting. And what we may be seeing coming up really soon is a Y-Cyclone with a Dark Claw with the Yveltal EX with fewer energy cards. Or not? It seems that he's still holding off on drawing prizes and being aggressive. He's just gone full out with this conservative junk hunting over and over again. And you can see that as a very useful play later on down the line. Here, I don't think that that's the best option, but at any rate, this is a fun, casual game. It's not necessarily about getting everything 100% right. It's about having a good time with the game. But he may have something up his sleeve here. There may be a more useful approach to this, a way to make it so that he is able to win the game through long-term setups through these junk hunts. He may be thinking that by getting too aggressive with his plays, he could set himself up to being too vulnerable to Rayquaza EXs. But at any rate, he is going for the Yveltal at long last, retreating that Sableye. I don't know why he didn't do that last turn, but at any rate, it's here. He's attacking and he's ready to go, bringing the opponent down to 2 prizes left. And as we've been talking about time and time again, it's almost without a doubt too late for the M-board player. So he's double checking the math. He has it one way or the other, whether he Y-Cyclones or Evil Balls, but he probably wants to set up that additional damage with the Y-Cyclone, dealing 110 damage to knock out Reshiram and load up that Yveltal even further. And this is just a hopeless game for the player on the left. She needed that Pokemon catcher heads, and unfortunately for her, that just wasn't the case. So now she's superior energy retrievaling. She will have the knockout on the Yveltal EX this turn, but unfortunately, the Yveltal EX on the bench will have the knockout on her right back. So we've got that energy. My question is if she just has any way to win this game. Does she have a Pokemon catcher sitting in her hand? Looks like she had to discard everything for that superior energy retrieval. And nope. Nope, this game is 100% over for the player on the left, and the player on the right, the Yveltal EX Darkrai player, will be taking this game for an Evil Ball for, let's calculate how much damage that is. We notice at least 5 Darkness Energy and 1 Double Colorless Energy, so that's 7 energy on the Yveltal EX, at least a Lightning Energy on the Rayquaza EX, and a Dark Claw on the Yveltal EX. So that gives us a whopping 200 damage to the Rayquaza EX at least. And it looks like, rather than just announcing the attack and getting the game over, he is adding up as much as he can, trying to add as much as he can. You'll see that quite often with players, just having as much fun out of that last knockout as they can get, figuring out the exact amount. And oh, and there's a third double colorless energy. We have 5 darkness 3 double colorless energy for a grand total of 11 energy on the Yveltal EX, 1 on the Rayquaza, 12 energy total, 240 damage with that, and 280 when you add the base damage and the Dark Claw. So this is beyond overkill. Looks like he's just dangling the Rayquaza EX a little bit, but there we go. There's the Yveltal EX Evil Ball for the game, and a convincing win for Yveltal at that. So again, my name is John Kettler. Thank you very much for this opportunity to audition for commentary, and I hope that I'm selected. Thanks.